One of the unusual things about Silverlight applications is that they have the ability to raise file dialogues and interact with the local file system in a secure way from the browser. So let's take a look at that in this video. Where I've started off here is I've already started with a little solution. We have a Silverlight project and we have the website that hosts it. And I've started to build a tiny bit of UI in my page.xaml. Essentially what we have here is a grid, and in that grid we have a list box, and that list box is data binding its item source. It has an item template for each item. At the moment what it will display as a text block with the words not set. We also then have an image and a button, and the button has the content load. And if you switch to the designer, let's just resume reloading that designer, you can see that it's a layout that looks kind of like this at the moment. The image is here, the list box is here, the button is here. So let's put some code behind this button. What I want to do is just say click equals on load, something like that. Let's jump to the code behind here. Let's collapse this down, and let's say event handler on load. What I'm going to do in here is open a file dialog. So we'll say open file dialog. Let's call it OFD equals new one of those. And on there we can set various things. So for instance, a filter, you might be familiar with this with Windows Forms programming and so on. We can say, let's say JPEG files, star.jpg, that would be star.jpg. And then we could say all files, star.star, star.star. And we could enable whether we want to allow multi-select or not. So let's say true, we allow multiple selections. And then we can say if the open file dialog, when you show it as a dialog, comes back with a success code, then what we want to do is get access to the files that have been selected. Now this is interesting because you have selected file and selected files. They are both of a type called file dialog info. You cannot do very much with these files for security reasons. So firstly, the user has to prompt you. You have to prompt the user and show the dialog in order to get any file whatsoever from the user's file system. But even when you've got there, all you can do is grab the name of the file. That's the name of the file, not the path to the file, so you learn nothing about the user's file system. You can open this file for read as a stream, or you can open it for text as a stream reader. That's it. You can't write to the file, you can't rename the file, you can't learn about where the file came from. All of these things are for very good security reasons. So what I'll do here is I'll take the files that have been selected, let's assume there's multiple, and I'll use those as the data context to bind my list box to. So what we'll do, if we just remember, if we go back to the list box over here, we have a list box here which has its item source to be bound. So we'll wander back to the code here and we'll just say that our root data context equals ofd.selected files. Now at the moment we aren't displaying anything for those files, but we know that each one of these things has a property, if we look again, called name. So we can go back to our code and set the text here to be data bound to name. Let's save that. Let's press F5. Let's spin up the test page, see if we get our UI. Let's enable debugging. That's just fine. So we should get our UI. We should be able to click that load button. And let's go to C Windows Web Wallpaper, somewhere like that. Let's just go into that folder. Let's take a few JPEG files from here, open that, and we can see straight away that we're data bound and we've got our list box populated with these JPEG files. So that's kind of nice, but we'd probably want to read the files. So let's go back to our code. And what I want to do is handle the selection changed on my list box. So we'll say selection changed equals, and in fact I'll let Visual Studio throw in a new event handler for me here, and I'm just going to rename it to be called on selection changed. Let's jump into the code behind again. And here is on selection changed. Now for a list box with the selection changed, what you get is essentially a list of items that have been added and items that have been removed from the selection. I'm going to be a bit cheap and cheerful here, and we'll just say if e.addedItems is not null, so if there is something, and e.addedItems.count is bigger than 0, then we'll just simply take the first one of those things. And what we'll do is we'll say open file dialog info, let's call that file info, equals e.addedItem0 as file dialog info. Because if you remember, we data bound that list box to an array, a collection up here of file dialog infos, so it's perfectly reasonable to get one back out here as a file dialog info. We can then do something with this again. So remember, we can get the name, we can open it for read, we can open it for text. That's all we can do with it. What we want to do is pull the image out of it and put it on the screen. So we use a class in the framework called bitmap image. Let's go and bring that in. We'll say image equals new bitmap image. We'll say image.setSource. This wants a stream, so what we can do is say fileinfo.openRead, which will give us a stream. And then we can go ahead and say my image, which is the image I've actually got on the screen here. So we can say my image.source equals the bitmap image that we just created. Let's go press F5 and see if that works for us. So once again, we'll go and click on the button to open the file dialog. We open the dialog, we'll go to C, Windows, Web, Wallpaper. We'll pick up some images. Let's just pick a few images, open those up. We're data bound to this list. Let's change the selection. And you can see pretty quickly, we're just reading those files from the local machine under the security auspices of the user and the restricted set of operations we can perform on them, and now they're present inside our Silverlight application. If we wanted to send them over a web service to a server, we could do that. If we wanted to manipulate these images in .NET code, we could do that. The trick here is that we can use that file dialog in order to interact securely with the user's file system and get that limited set of access to files on that machine. So hopefully you just get a quick flavor as to how we can work with file dialogs and files from the user that the user has selected in a limited way from a Silverlight application.